Hey guys! I'm so excited. Okay, we're in the second week of our series called Goals, where we're looking at some of the goals we can have for our faith. But before we jump into what we're talking about today, I have a story. So I was in middle school, right? Just like you guys. And I wanted to join the swim team for one reason alone, because I thought the swim team people were so cool. And I'm like, surely I can be friends with them and impress them if I just join the swim team. So I went home, I asked my mom, like, hey mom, let me join the swim team. She was like, we have one huge problem, a very big problem. I said, what would that be? She said, well, you can't swim. I said, okay, that's a good point, but I can swim. I jumped in the deep end last summer. Yes, I almost drowned, but who's still alive? Me. Okay, mom, I can do this. I finally persuaded my mom to do it, and I went to practices, and it was really, really hard. I just have to say that. But then for our first swim meet, my coach said, we're gonna try you out on the freestyle 100. Long story short, I jumped into the water. I couldn't dive. I belly flopped. I got down to the other end of the pool. I almost drowned because I got so tired. Plus, all of the other kids were so fast. They were just swimming, and they were on their third lap, and I was just finishing my first lap. And so I cheated. I got out of the water when they got out of the water before I was actually done with the race, and I ran out of the gym, and I never saw the swim team again. It was a horrible situation, folks. Not to mention, I almost drowned. But anyways, okay, and I didn't have any swim team friends. But here's the deal. I know you can relate to that. Some of you guys are judging me, okay? You can relate. Maybe your goal isn't exactly the same as mine was, like trying to get friends, but you probably know what it feels like to work towards gaining the approval of someone in your life. I mean, who doesn't like to be praised, affirmed, and supported? And who doesn't like that feeling of pride we get when we gain the acceptance of others? I mean, I think if we're being completely honest, we'd all say that we want to gain the approval of others, especially in places like school or with our friends. And if I were to go to your school, what qualities would I need to have to fit in? What music would I need to listen to? And what about YouTube channels? Which ones should I watch regularly to fit in? And sports, I can't throw very well or catch, okay? But what teams would I have to follow and root for? Here's the bad news. I'd probably never fit in with you guys. I'm just not that cool. I have mom shoes on right now. I like long walks on the beach. And I drive a minivan. I just probably wouldn't fit in, okay? But my point is this. All of us are seeking the acceptance of others. In some way or another, approval matters to all of us. Maybe for you, it's your friends or other kids at school. You get caught up in wanting the kids around you to like you so you can change the way you act or dress or talk to fit in. You care about what they think of you and you want their acceptance. Or maybe it's your parents. You try really hard to stay in your best behavior, make the best grades, do your best to help around the house, all because you know it's important to them and you want their approval. Maybe it's your coaches or your teachers. You work hard at practice, you're like running, you're sweating, things are happening on your neck, I don't know. Or maybe you do it in the classroom because you want the people in charge to not only see how hard you're working, but to also praise the work you're doing. Or maybe for you, it's God. You really want God to approve of the way you're living your life. So you do your best to show up at church every Sunday. You're praying a lot. You memorize as many Bible verses as you can. Why? Because you think that's how you'll gain God's approval. Honestly, the list could just go on and on. I could be here all day long. In one way or another, we're all working toward the approval of someone in our lives. And without even realizing it, we've made their approval, praise, and support our number one goal. But the problem is that seeking that approval from so many different places is really, really exhausting. It would be completely draining, frustrating, and impossible. When we work so hard to be praised, how do we feel at the end of the day? Well, in my experience, we don't feel the pride and affirmation we're looking for. We just feel exhausted. Why? I think constantly making our lives about the approval of others is exhausting because of these reasons. For starters, it never works. There are just some people in your life who will never make you feel like you're enough. You'll never be able to do enough or say enough or be enough of what they want you to be. I mean, no matter how hard you work to gain their approval, they aren't going to give it. And that's just plain exhausting. Second, it's easy to lose. I mean, approval is funny that way. One day, you may have it from someone, and the next day, it's gone. There's no rhyme or reason for it, but when that praise and affirmation is suddenly gone, you're back to square one and starting all over again to try to get it back. And number three, it feels like pressure. There are some people in your life who are just really, really needy. I mean, that's just the truth. They want you to want their approval, and they put pressure on you to try and earn it. And lastly, it's hard to know when we have it. I mean, think about it. How do we ever really know we have the full approval from someone else? Our parents, our coaches, even God. How can we ever be sure we're fully accepted and supported? Because we can't. We just keep working and working toward it until we're worn down and, you know the word, exhausted. When you look at it this way, this search for praise and acceptance feels like a never-ending cycle that keeps going and going and going and going and going until you're, you know the word, exhausted. So how do we break it? How do we stop making the approval of others our goal? In this series, we're looking at a book in the Bible called Galatians. What's cool about Galatians is that it's actually a letter written by a guy named Paul to new believers in a place called Galatia. Paul actually started the church in Galatia, but shortly after he left the Galatians to go on to a new place. False teachers then showed up behind him. And these guys, they started telling the new Christians in Galatia that in order to actually be a Christian, they had to follow all these Jewish laws. And guess what, folks? That wasn't true at all. And the new believers needed a reminder that having faith in Jesus was all Christianity required of them. Their faith in Jesus made them right before God. They didn't have to earn God's approval by following all of these rules like these people were telling them to do. Because of Jesus, they already had it. And Paul wrote this letter to remind them of that. Now, the false teachers weren't big fans of Paul's. They were like haters, in other words. In fact, they were busy telling the Galatians not to listen to him. They were saying things like, the reason Paul is telling you that you don't have to follow all of those laws is because he's just trying to please people. He's just trying to make it easier on you. Well, Paul responded to the things those false teachers were saying about him in his letter. And what he said can help us in our struggle with approval. Here's what he wrote. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. So basically, Paul said that there are two options when it comes to approval, other people or God. And we can either spend our time people-pleasing and trying to earn the people's acceptance and praise, or we can choose to please God. But Paul didn't stop there. He followed that statement up by saying that when we choose to please others, when we choose to make the approval of others our goal, we aren't living the way that God calls us to live. Paul himself was a great example of this. I mean, he wasn't afraid to say this hard truth to the Galatians. Why? Because he wasn't looking for their approval. He didn't feel pressure to act a certain way, talk a certain way, or live a certain way for the sake of those around him. The only approval that mattered to Paul was God's. And because of Jesus, Paul knew he already had that approval for eternity. So even though Paul knew his words might be hard for the Galatians to hear, he still said them. Now, let me stop here and say this. Paul wasn't giving us permission to say whatever we want to anyone at any time just because we think it's right. Notice how Paul spoke to the Galatians. It wasn't rude, it wasn't harsh, or without kindness. He was straightforward, but not without love. The only filter Paul used to judge his own life and words and actions was God's. He wasn't controlled by the opinions of others, and he didn't want us to be either. You see, there's really only one place you ultimately need approval from. And you know what? You already have it. Because of Jesus, you already have God's approval for who you are, just as you are. There's nothing you can do to earn it, change it, or even lose it. You just have to live it. I mean, that's the goal. The goal is to live from approval, not for approval. Listen, I know middle schoolers are under so much pressure to perform well. I mean, I can only imagine between your teachers and your parents and your friends and coaches and small group leaders. I mean, there are tons of people in your life who you may be seeking approval from. That's a lot to deal with. And honestly, it's a lot of stress. That's why this truth from Paul is really important. The goal is to live from approval, not for approval. And when you remember that, you're like free from the pressure and you're free from the stress and exhaustion of trying to earn approval from anyone or anywhere else. So start by asking yourself this: who are the people you're looking for acceptance from? Who are you constantly performing for? Who are the people you feel like you need to change something about yourself for? Whose approval are you making your goal? Think about this. Think about what it would feel like to be completely free from all of those pressures. What would it take for you to feel the freedom from living for their approval? Maybe you need to spend less time with that group of friends, or give up trying out for that team, or maybe you need to look up a verse to remind yourself of who God says you are, or maybe just talk to your small group leader for guidance about making a change in your life. Whatever it is, try to take one step away from the acceptance and praise of others so you can take one step toward living in the freedom that comes from God's approval. Remember, the goal is to live from approval, not for approval. So as you head out today, I want you to think about this question: what is one area of my life where I'm living for the approval of others?